Greetings and salutations, folks. Jay here. And for years, I had done a kind of end of the year review. I do albums, movies, etc. And so, for the longest time, I had done written blogs or written reviews and then put them out on, good Lord, I think I probably started on MySpace and then did it on Facebook for years and years. So for the first time, I'm just going to do a video instead and give y'all, the viewers, my top stuff for 2017. Now, to start things off, I'm going to look at music. Now, I'll be honest, when I look and compare to last year and subsequent years before that, I had like tons of music from that year, and it was kind of tough to like figure out what would be my top. This year, maybe it was just me. Feel free to comment or send me some recommendations or anything like that. But for me, it was really a struggle musically. I really didn't buy that many albums. Maybe it's because I'm getting older and more picky, but I didn't really get that much. So before I jump into my top 10, I'm going to do some honorable mentions because I've been recommended some stuff, and I listened through the albums and I just wanted to give some kudos. First, it's Cradle of Filth's Cryptoriana. Now, when I listen to the album, musically speaking, it's pretty well freaking done. In my humble opinion, it's probably some of the best stuff they've done since the 90s. So me, when it comes to Cradle of Filth, I'm a huge fan of Principles of Evil Made Flesh and then Dusk and Her Embrace. Those two albums I really like, and I don't really listen to much of the other ones. But this album, musically speaking, was really fantastic. My main flaw of the album, or the main thing I dislike, is, you know, I hate to say it, but it's Danny's voice. He's always been hit or miss with me, the shrieks and everything, and I felt it was more like hardcore, like the way you could hear the lyrics really well, but it was just kind of interesting. His voice was kind of different, and I wasn't a huge fan of it. From musically speaking, it was really awesome. It's almost like I wish I could take the vocalist from Karak Angren and like put his vocals instead of Danny's, and that album would be amazing in my eyes, but yeah. Now, the other honorable mention, I would definitely purchase this album if I found it around. But there's this, and that's the thing, this year for me, I've always been pretty big into black metal, but this year was definitely a death metal year for me. And I didn't even really see that many black metal releases. Now, I know some of y'all, I hate to say it, but there's some black metal subgenres I'm not really too big into. I like traditional black metal, but some of this post stuff I'm not as big into. I love the original stuff by like Alcest, but I feel like there's a lot of knockoff bands that aren't really capturing that essence and the atmosphere that those bands really pioneered. But anyway, Cadaver Discipline, and their album Death Supremacy. They're a Swedish band. They remind me a lot of like Hellsaw or like bands like that, and you can definitely hear they're Swedish, like Marduk, and a little mixture of Dissection and that traditional Swedish sound. And Enthroned also, I hear a lot. I don't think they're quite as like heavy or like brutal as like Enthroned or like a band like Cethereal, but they have like kind of the groove slash melody of like, and catchiness of some of the other bands like Stormlord or Dissection or Sacramentum or something like that. But I think they're doing some really solid stuff for black metal now, so I'll definitely be paying attention to them a lot more. So that's my honorable mentions. So without further ado, number 10 on the list is Exhumed, Death Revenge. Compared to other earlier Exhumed albums, this one is a lot more catchy. There's a lot more groove. It reminds me a lot of like Malevolent Creation and stuff like that, and so it's got this really great mixture of heavy and groove. The lyrics are really awesome. It's like kind of like a concept on this like grave rob, or I don't know if they're grave robbers, but like there's just this whole awesome concept. Let me look at it real quick. That way I can specify and not look like an idiot. But, dang it, I can't find it. But anyway, I don't know. It kind of looks like this concept of like these, like this 1800s, like late 1900s. I'm not sure what it's going into, but it just takes into history into account. Who knows? I guess it's multiple stories on like the graves and stuff like that. But I don't know. It's just really awesome. It's a lot smarter than you know, just your traditional gore and grossness. So definitely check out that album. It's pretty cool. Their tour came through, and they really they did an awesome job with that. So going into number 9, speaking of which, a band that toured with Exhumed is this band called Archaic, and they came out with their album Nemethia, and it's a solid technical death metal release. Compared to their prior releases, this one was a lot more innovative. It's a bit more technical. There's some orchestrations here and there, a lot of really good riffs. Definitely take a listen to Of Violence and Pestilence Mourn. That song, that track in particular, is heavy. It's really awesome. So that's a really solid release from them. Number 8 on the list is a band that I kind of fell off the radar a little bit from me, but it is Hour of Penance's Cast the First Stone. Now, Paradogma and crap, what's the one before that? Anyway, y'all know what it is. The album before that, I feel like that was their peak. It's kind of like their middle. The middle of their career was their peak. Really heavy, some really awesome stuff. And then after that, it's funny because they got a lot of attention. They did some U.S. tours, but a couple albums after that, they weren't as strong. They kind of continued with that like behemoth kind of thing with like, some of their lyrics were a little, they got a little cheesier from that, like your typical like, we hate the church and Christians and blah and all that stuff. But this particular album, not only is it really well written musically, and it definitely, they've kind of pushed a little bit more groove in their riffs without you know, they're still technical, especially since they have Dave from Septical Gorge as their drummer now. But anyway, the whole concept of the album is looking at like the Crusades with like Christians and Islamic armies like going at it, and I believe it's like kind of set in like Turkey and like battles in Turkey. I could be wrong, but the fact that they've gone more into like a history direction in their lyrics, I really like that. That's what I've really liked about bands like Marduk or God Dethroned, where they kind of push aside the cheesy like Satan touched my butthole and like those types of lyrics to like history. Me, I was a history major in college, so I really like the albums that go over history. So that was a really well done album by them. Now next on the list is Septic Flesh Codex Omega. It's a pretty solid release. I do have a little bit of some complaints with it. From a musical standpoint, they're continuing to be heavy. I think there's a lot of influences from their previous albums like Communion and The Great Mass, and then their last album. So you can hear all that influence in one. The orchestrations are pretty legit. My only major complaint is that I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the production. But I had this complaint about Nile a few years back. But I feel like the riffs are just not, there's not as much oomph. There's not as much meat in the riffs as previous releases. So when I listen to the album, I can hear it in the production. I don't know what it is, but I feel like it's not as meaty as the other albums. And in some ways, it's a little less technical. Like certain songs are pretty awesome and have like some technicality, but I don't know. There's something about the album that the reason why it wasn't as big as some of the previous albums was it just was lacking in certain categories. So, but anyway, with number 7, that's Septic Flesh. Now, number 6 was a band that I purchased on a whim, and I had no idea, but this album came out in 2017, and it's once again, it's a death metal band from Italy. So you have great bands like Flesh God Apocalypse, Hour of Penance, and Sepulchral Gorge. But this band kind of came out of nowhere, and they're kind of a fresh band on the scene. I think some of the band members are from other bands, and I think one of the guys is from like Hour of Penance or something like that. But Hideous Divinity, and this album's called Advenians. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but this album is a really solid technical death metal release. So if you're a fan of Hour of Penance or some older Flesh God Apocalypse, definitely give this a listen. What really stands out is the vocals. He's got a real strong voice. It reminds me a lot of like Bloodbath, like the way the words are pronounced. And I think like Mikael Åkerfeldt and Peter Tägtgren with Bloodbath, the way they do their vocals or had done their vocals, really solid. So this is a real powerful release, so definitely check it out. But this is Hideous Divinity with Advenians. Now number 5 on the list is a band from down under called Ne Obliviscaris, and this is the album Urn. This is a pretty awesome release. The band typically has like 12-15 minute long tracks, and without a doubt the track that definitely stands out for me is Irie, whatever it's called. An amazingly atmospheric track. Definitely give this a listen. One of my big issues is that it's, you know, is it short? Maybe, but it doesn't have that many tracks. But it's still pretty solid. I think I've heard arguments with this, but you know, I think it's a little less technical than previous releases. And it's funny because the production, I feel like it's not as well produced as the previous release, but it still has a really decent sound to it. So maybe, who knows, maybe I'm just listening to it in a strange way, I don't know. But it's still a really solid release. Definitely check it out. Now, number 4 on the list, going right back into death metal. This album kind of came out of left field for me, even though I saw the band on tour and it was really awesome, but I didn't really know that much about it and didn't hear much about it. But it's Origin with Unparalleled Universe. Now I'm going to say this, my top, I'd say between 4, 3, and 2, they kind of fluctuate of like which one I really like the most, like more than the other. But I'll say that my top 4, or well, I should say my top, you know, up to number 2 is kind of a struggle. But Origin with Unparalleled Universe, this is a solid release. And I've read some reviews. People have said this is their best work since Antithesis. And it's really awesome. There's tons of gravity blasts. It's heavy. Vocals are great. I guess my only complaint is at some points, you know, the tracks kind of like fuse together into like a really long song at some points. But there's a lot of tempo changes compared to previous releases where it's kind of like the complaint is that it's like whatever, the same sound over and over. But this has some solid releases or solid tracks on it. But without a doubt, track 9, Unequivocal, that is one of the top songs they've ever done in my humble opinion. The first 5 minutes are an awesome tech death song, and then the last 5 minutes is this instrumental piece, and it's such a great epic track. So give it a listen. I hope they do it live much more from now on. So that's Origin with Unparalleled Universe. Now my number 3 is kind of funny because I think because it came out in January, I'm not sure if it's, you know, I've heard different things. Maybe in Europe it was released in 2016, but I have no idea. But anyway, it's Exandria with Theater of Dimensions. I'm leaving death metal behind and going into this, more of that symphonic metal, like Nightwish type of sound. But Exandria has been a band that's gotten a lot of attention. Their album Sacrificium or whatever it was a few years back, really awesome album. And I think the album before that was really awesome too. This album is not quite as good as those two previous releases, but it still has some really solid tracks. It's funny, some of the tracks that are like the videos / the ones they promote, the singles so to speak, I don't think they're as good. Like We Are Murderers, and there's a couple other ones. And Death to the Holy, like I don't think they're as solid, but Where the Heart Is Home and Call of Destiny, there's some really solid tracks. I think Call of Destiny is a video, but it's a pretty lengthy album. I think it has like 12 or 13 tracks. But there's enough really good tracks on it to make it a really decent album. So definitely check it out. I know that band's going through a ton of changes and people are going crazy about it, but oh well. At least they released that album this year and it's pretty legit. Number 2 is the band Icebreaker with Sturmfährt. Now, Icebreaker, I've been a fan of those for years. I didn't even realize they had a new album until I was like in one of the industrial goth stores in the city for CDs. And this album's really solid. It has like 16 tracks on it. Well, technically 15. And there's enough really awesome tracks on here that make it really stand out. Like In einem Boot, Was ist hier los, and Besser, Sturmfährt, Automat. There's just a bunch, and it even has fun with like Wir sind rock and roll and Wir sind gold. It's just, there's fun tracks on there. It's just a really solid album. The band doesn't disappoint, and I'm really glad they came out with this one. So without further ado, my number 1 album of the list. My only complaint is I wish it was longer and had more tracks, but it is Archspire's Relentless Mutation. Now, the album before this, I think it got a little bit of flack. I've read some reviews on like Metal Archives, and people are like, oh, like it's noodling and all this other stuff, and people, you know, haters are haters. This album really, I enjoy the previous album, Lucid. I can't remember the other, but anyway, I really enjoyed it. But this album took everything that people could complain about and just knocked it out of the park. There's a, like, the vocals, of course, are just machine guns. And me, as like a death metal, black metal vocalist, I'm like, I'll practice and be like, you know, whoa, like I can't do it. You know, it'll just be all over the place. And so I'll try to practice to him, and it's pretty ridiculous. But the riffs are really solid. The drums, the bass, everything's really solid. Like it's a much more mature band. So without a doubt, number 1, Archspire, Relentless Mutation. This is a solid album. It's my favorite release of 2017, until I hear otherwise. So if you have recommendations or have your own lists, please feel free to let me know. And anywho, from there, let's see how much time I have. Going to take a quick water break. Okay, I'm at 17 minutes so far. So I'm going to see if I can jump into this. So I'm going to jump into my movie list. And so I'm going to be honest with y'all. I didn't really see that many movies this year. So my list is pretty crappy. So I'm just going to point out, alright, I didn't get to see Blade Runner. I've heard great things about it. And I know The Darkest Hour is out right now. And there's been a bunch of other movies that came out this year that critics have been saying that are great and all this other stuff. Yo, I missed out. So this is probably one of my worst movie like top 10 lists because I just didn't see that much. I'm so sorry. But anyway,